The HP Dev 1, a Linux notebook that's so nice that I have to review it twice. Hello and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the HP Dev 1 Linux notebook again. Now, it wasn't that long ago that I reviewed the HP Dev 1, but since I've had it in the studio for a little while longer, I figured I would give you guys some additional information about this notebook. In the original review, I came away very impressed. I love this computer, it's just so awesome. But you guys had a lot of questions, and I figured that I should try to answer as many of those questions as I can. Now, to be fair, I'm definitely not going to be able to answer every question that you guys have, but I will try to answer as many as I can in this video. And also, this might not be the last video that I do about the HP Dev 1. If you guys have a lot of other questions that I didn't get around to answering in this video, then please be patient with me because what I'll do is possibly make a third video. So you may as well subscribe to Learn Linux TV if you haven't already done that. Not only do I have a lot of awesome videos coming that are going to be released very soon, if I do end up doing a third video about the HP Dev 1, if you're subscribed, you'll be the first to see it. Anyway, since this is a sequel to the previous review, I highly recommend that you watch that video first if you haven't already done so before you watch this video. I will not be repeating any information that I've gone over in that review unless it's relevant to something that I'm going over today. So if you haven't already watched that first video, then go ahead and check that video out, and this video will be waiting for you whenever you're ready for it. Anyway, I think I'm actually getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I'm talking about the possibility of a part 3, and I haven't even told you guys what we're going over in part 2 yet. So in this video, some of the topics that I'll be covering include, but aren't limited to, upgrading the memory, trying other distributions on this notebook, fan noise, temperature, and of course, there's going to be more where that came from. And in fact, I had a lot of fun with this video, which I think you'll see as the video goes on. I've definitely done some interesting experiments on the HP Dev 1 that I can't wait to show you. Now, I can't wait to get started, but before I do, I need to pay the bills. And to do that, I need to actually mention the sponsor for today's video, which is actually me. Okay, this isn't really so much of an ad read, so much as it's a shameless plug, but I have a new book coming out, Mastering Ubuntu Server 4th edition. The previous edition of this book was a great success. I certainly appreciate all of you guys checking out that book, and also the reviews as well, which were actually really good. So as you can see, Mastering Ubuntu Server has been a successful book for me, and I figured it was time to do a 4th edition because, well, Ubuntu Server 2204 is now out, and that's exactly what this book has been updated to cover. And just like the previous edition, the new edition will cover everything you need to know to manage real Ubuntu servers. This includes the initial installation, installing applications, managing users, storage, and much more. And throughout the book, you'll be working on hands-on activities such as setting up a Kubernetes cluster, setting up Nextcloud, and even spinning up Ubuntu instances in the cloud. Mastering Ubuntu Server 4th edition is expected to release around fall of 2023, or possibly even sooner. You could pre-order the book by visiting ubuntuserverbook.com, and that site will have links to the various places where you can buy it. And if you pre-order the book, I would really appreciate that. And to answer a very common question about the 4th edition, many people ask, what's new this time around? Well, the main point is, updating it for Ubuntu 2204. So if you already have the 3rd edition, then whether or not you need to upgrade to the new edition depends solely on whether or not the book being updated to 2204 is important to you. But if you haven't already jumped on board and checked out my Mastering Ubuntu Server book, then the 4th edition is absolutely the book to start with. So definitely check out the new version of the book. I can't wait for you guys to read it. I'm really excited. I worked really hard on it, and I think you're going to love it. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and switch gears to the main topic today, which of course is the HP Dev 1. And when I originally reviewed this notebook, it took me completely by surprise, and it actually ended up becoming my favorite Linux notebook. Things like the build quality, software integration, performance, and much more was just very impressive. But today, like I mentioned, we're taking another look at the Dev 1, especially since I've had even more time to spend with it. And the first thing that I would like to go over in today's video is the experience that I had while upgrading the memory. Now, at this point in time, there's something that's really bothering me when it comes to most of the notebooks that are released. It seems like everything is, well, soldered in. But the HP Dev 1, on the other hand, advertises user upgradable memory, and they're very proud of that. And that's great because by HP being on board with users upgrading the components in their computers, I feel like they're actually doing it right and they're setting a good example for other vendors. So with the HP Dev 1, neither of the memory modules are soldered on. They're freely removable and there's nothing stopping you from upgrading the memory. And that's exactly what I decided to do. Now normally the HP Dev 1 actually ships with 16 gigs of memory. If that's enough for you, then, well, of course, you don't actually have to upgrade it. But what I did was I decided to max out the memory. The HP Dev 1 maxes out at 64 gigabytes, so that's what I decided to install. So I ordered some memory for this notebook and then proceeded to install it. Now, one thing that I'd like to mention, though, is that you'll need a special screwdriver to open the HP Dev 1. And no, it's not proprietary or anything like that. It just needs a very small bit in order to turn the screws. And I wanted to point that out because I feel like it'll be very disappointing if you ordered memory for this notebook, then the memory arrived only for you to find out that you didn't have a screwdriver that can open it up. So definitely check out the affiliate links down below. Among those, I will have a link to the memory modules that I've ordered for this unit. And in addition to that, like I mentioned, I will also include some information regarding the particular bit that I used to open up the chassis. So that way you can make sure that you have the appropriate tools. Another thing that you'll need is a spudger because the chassis is actually very firmly attached. So definitely make sure that you have a spudger or something to, remove the chassis with because it has a very tight grip. So what was the process like? Well, first, I wanted to make sure that I was adequately prepared for the task at hand. And many people have said that before you work on the interior of your computer, you should touch something metal before you get started. And I'm not really sure why it's recommended to do this, but I figured I'll just go along with it. Anyway, for the most part, the process is fairly straightforward. There's 5 screws underneath the notebook, so you first loosen those, and then you remove the metal plate on the bottom. But the grip of the bottom cover was on so firmly that it took me a bit of time to loosen it. So it's one of those things where you just have to be patient, you take your time, and eventually the cover will actually let go and you'll be able to remove it. After you remove the cover, the interior is exposed, and here's what the internals look like. The memory is located behind a metal cage, as you see here. So you simply apply a slight amount of pressure to it, and it'll open right up, exposing the memory. Once you've upgraded the modules, you simply reverse the process and reattach the bottom cover. And just like you can see from the screen recording that you're seeing right now, I now have 64 gigabytes of memory on the HP Dev 1. So next, let's talk about trying other distributions on the HP Dev 1. By default, it comes with Pop! OS. I think all of you know that by now. But I thought it'd be a lot of fun to just try something else on this machine and just see what happens. Now, as an aside, since it does ship with Pop! OS, if you ever call HP for support, my suggestion is to load Pop! OS back onto this machine before you call. And it's not HP that's saying this, it's actually me. I just figured it might be kind of confusing for the support staff if they're expecting this machine to have Pop! OS on it, and then they find themselves troubleshooting a completely different distribution. But anyway, I decided to do this because I figured that if I know my audience as well as I think I do, I bet that a lot of you guys have been wondering what happens when you install something other than Pop! OS on this machine. So I decided to go for it, and I decided to try 2 different distributions on this machine. And what I wanted to do was give it a challenge. So you might be wondering then, which distros did Jay decide to run on the HP Dev 1? Well, before I go over that, there's one quick piece of information that I would like to give you. Something that I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering about that's actually directly related to the task at hand in this section. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a list of the F keys that you could press during the startup process for various things. So in case you're curious, you're welcome. Anyway, I decided to try 2 distributions that I thought would be a real challenge. I wanted to give this machine a challenge. I didn't want to go with Ubuntu because I figured that'd be too easy. Actually, I did try Ubuntu, but I'm not going to show it in this video because, that's too easy. So, which distros did I test? Well, I decided to test Arch Linux and Debian, specifically Debian Stable. Am I insane? Well, maybe, but that's a different video, and since this isn't a mental health video, that's a different channel as well. But anyway, here's how it worked out. First, let's take a look at Arch Linux running on the HP Dev 1, and that's what you see on the screen right now. And I decided to start this conversation off with Arch Linux because, well, I may as well get the easy one out of the way, and yes, Arch Linux was the easy one. In fact, it runs fine on the HP Dev 1 with no issues at all whatsoever. In case you're curious, I decided to use the Arch install method for installing Arch Linux on the Dev 1. Arch install is actually included right there in the Arch Linux ISO image, so I just went ahead and went along with that. I also made sure to enable wireless during installation, and after the installation process was complete, then, well, it was all set. Everything worked. There was literally nothing for me to do at all. Even the hotkeys functioned properly. So yeah, does the HP Dev 1 work with Arch Linux? Absolutely. It definitely does. So let's chalk that up to a win for Arch Linux. Now, Debian Stable, on the other hand, was more of a challenge. But honestly, I was kind of expecting that. Now, I love Debian. It's one of my favorite distributions out there. But the fact is, when you compare it to other distros, Debian has among the worst hardware support when it comes to desktops and notebooks of any distribution available today. So yeah, I was absolutely expecting a challenge here, and Debian didn't disappoint. When I first tried it, Debian wouldn't actually boot at all. It wouldn't even make it past the grub screen when attempting to launch the installer. Now, the second attempt was a bit different. It actually did boot that time. I'm not even sure what happened because I didn't change anything. But the problem that I ran into is that the video card was not supported and Wi-Fi wasn't supported as well. The resolution when it comes to Debian Stable was stuck at 800 by 600, and the Wi-Fi card was not detected at all, so I had no access to internet. So the first attempt at installing Debian was, unfortunately, a complete failure. I couldn't even get internet access or, proper video support. Now the thing is, I've installed Debian so many times, I know exactly how to work around this. And you definitely can work around this. It's just that you don't have to work around it on other distributions. So I blame Debian for the first attempt at installing Debian being a failure. It's not HP's fault. Debian does need to do a better job when it comes to supporting hardware. But there's a secret version of Debian that you can install that doesn't have many of these problems. And Debian themselves, they don't really advertise this much, but they make available a special version of Debian that has firmware and some proprietary drivers baked right into the ISO image. And I get it, we all hate proprietary firmware, but the thing is, well, sometimes there's just no other way. And, well, not everyone knows that this alternate version of Debian even exists. And when I tried the non-free firmware version of Debian, everything worked perfectly fine out of the box. Literally, everything worked perfectly fine. The resolution was actually the native resolution for the panel out of the box. Wi-Fi was also supported out of the box. And all of the hotkeys worked as well. So the moral of the story is that if you want to install Debian on a notebook or desktop, never, and I repeat, never even remotely consider using the standard version of Debian that they make available. Instead, go with the non-free alternate version, and you shouldn't have nearly as many problems when it comes to hardware support. And by using that version, you'll definitely save yourself from some of the frustration that you would otherwise experience. If you're considering running Debian on your end, then what I've done is I've prepared a short link that goes directly to the non-free alternate version of Debian, and you could use that link anytime you want to go to download Debian. But anyway, when it comes to Debian, using the non-free version, I was able to get it installed. And not only did I get it installed, everything worked out of the box. Performance was great. Even the hotkeys worked. It was just an amazing experience. So Debian fans, rejoice. You can definitely run Debian on the HP Dev 1. Now, let's talk about performance, temperatures, and noise. And the test scenario that I came up with was one that actually tests all of those things. I thought it would be a fun experiment to run a virtual machine on the Dev 1 and see how well that works. So for this test, I went ahead and installed VirtualBox, and then after I did that, I set up a Debian virtual machine. Since Debian works great on servers and VMs, I figured that it would be a great test. So I went ahead and installed Debian inside of the VM. I sped through the installer, I kept all of the defaults, and when it was done, I had Debian installed inside the VM. After that, I went ahead and installed the guest editions, and then at that point, I had myself a Debian virtual machine. So you might be thinking, big deal. so what? You ran a Debian virtual machine. That's not something that's really all that unique, and you could run a Debian virtual machine on anything. Well, actually, I decided to take this test to the next level and just go crazy with it. So I decided to make a clone of the initial VM. So at that point, I had two. And then I decided to clone it again, and again, and again, and again. And you know what? I kept cloning that VM over and over again until I ended up with 20 Debian virtual machines on this notebook. And then after I reached the total of 20 virtual machines on this notebook, I decided to start them up. All of them, one after another. And you know what? What's interesting here is that the Dev1 handled this beautifully. At no point did the overall performance tank. And this also gave me a chance to test fan noise as well. I didn't even think to test that in the previous review because I heard the fan so infrequently that I actually completely forgot about it. I mean, sure, the fan would actually be audible sometimes, but only for a short period of time while I was performing some sort of heavy task. But even with starting 20 VMs one after another, the fan was still not all that loud. I could barely hear it over the ambient noise in the room, so it's definitely quiet. And the temperatures weren't all that bad either. With 20 VMs running, here's the output of the sensors command to view the temperature output. And when no VMs are running, the temperature of the CPU is roughly 15 degrees cooler, as you can see here. So when it comes to temperature, noise, virtual machines, well, all of that is great. All of that works. There's no problems, and it performs well. Now, if you're curious about the temperature of the chassis itself, I measured the physical chassis temperature at around 29 to 31 degrees Celsius. And those temps were recorded just a few minutes after the VM experiment. And I didn't really expect it to be all that hot anyway, because at no point as I was using this machine did I ever feel like my palms were too hot. So, you know what? I think the temperatures are fine. Now, before I end this particular section of the video, I do want to mention that my office is very hot all the time. If it ever looks like I'm sweating during my videos, I actually am. The air conditioner is not working inside the studio. So of course, we're going to need to add some variance here for the room temperature being so warm. So perhaps on your end, it might even be cooler. Now, another suggestion that you guys mentioned in the comments in the Twitter post that I posted a while back, you guys wanted to know about developer things, and well, that makes sense. It's the HP Dev1. It's a developer's notebook. So I needed to run something development-like on this machine to give you guys an example of the performance while compiling something. Now, the problem is, though, I'm not really a developer. I mean, I am in a sense. I've even done a complete video series about Python, for example, but I'm not your, typical developer. I don't actually work with code every single day. So I needed something to compile to give you guys some sort of example about the performance while compiling something. So naturally, I decided to, compile a Linux kernel. And for this particular test, I didn't focus on configuring the kernel or anything. I mean, I had no intention of actually using the compiled kernel. I just wanted something to compile to show you guys what the performance was like. So that's what I did. I compiled the Linux kernel. And when I ran the make command, I decided to give it 10 build jobs because I wanted to accelerate the process. And believe it or not, it actually compiled the kernel in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That's crazy. Now, to be fair though, I didn't customize or configure anything at all whatsoever, like I mentioned earlier. So of course, your time will definitely vary depending on how you configure the Linux kernel if you go to compile a kernel. But still, it handled that very well, and the fan wasn't screaming or anything. This machine so far has been able to handle everything that I've thrown at it. So at this point, I'm going to close the second part of my review of the HP Dev1 right here. I've definitely given it some additional tests that I hope was useful to you guys in, making a decision whether or not this is something that you might be interested in. And if nothing else, I had a lot of fun. Now, is there anything that I missed, anything that I should have gone over? If I did, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. And if enough of you guys bring up some things that I should test, I might even do a third video. So let me know in the comments down below what you would like to know about this computer. And again, if I get enough comments, you might see a part 3. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you like this review, then definitely click that like button to let YouTube know that other people might also want to see this review as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.